Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Quantum Healthy Podcast. Today we have beautiful human. I'm so grateful to have Kelley Erickson on the podcast today. She is a functional mental health practitioner, functional nutrition coach, and holistic health practitioner who specializes in helping women restore their vitality after childhood trauma. I have a huge connection to Kelley, and that will probably come out. I'm going to let her share her story. I know you have helped so many people, and your Instagram, I know, is just a plethora of knowledge, and I love everything that you are bringing to the quantum biology space and I know it's from hard work and study because I'm doing the same thing, so I know that it doesn't come super easy to know all the ins and outs of the things that we normally don't actually, all these little nuances. And we're just so excited to have you today to go down some quantum rabbit holes with us. But why don't we start just to let you know or let us know your story a little bit and how you got to the quantum biology?
Sure. So, I grew up with pretty significant childhood trauma. Like when I've done the ACEs test, I score a 10 out of 10.
What can I ask what an ACE? People won't know what
Um,
ACE is.
Adverse childhood experiences. So it's like, did you experience domestic violence in the home? Did you experience a parent that went to jail or was absent? Did you experience poverty? Drug abuse, et cetera, et cetera? And so what they say is that the higher your ACEs score, the more likely you are to experience difficulties as an adult. So that could be learning difficulties, mental health challenges, physical health problems, so obesity, diabetes, etc. And then obviously things like addiction. And so yeah, that's kind of how I navigated childhood was really just not very pleasant. I wouldn't wish it on anyone really. But I was a pretty strong-willed person. I was also smart. So I had some kind of tools just kind of built into me that allowed me to kind of navigate it differently than maybe like my sisters or my brother. And so I moved through life from an outsider's perspective. It kind of looked pretty normal. I held pretty good jobs. I had decent relationships, but on the inside, I was a pretty big mess. And I started drinking pretty early. I got drunk for the first time in fourth grade. So I was like 9 or 10. But that wasn't a regular thing. But by middle school, I was drinking regularly, like socially. And then I met a boy in high school that didn't drink. And so I cut it out. And then by the time high school ended, we dated for like 3.5 years. I returned to drinking and then it progressed. And so by my early 20s, I was pretty comfortable drinking alone, which, isn't a very good sign. But I was still navigating life like other people. I held down pretty good jobs. I was managers and all of my, positions, etc. But the alcoholism just it progressed. It was a tool at first that I used to access like the social part of me. I had massive anxiety. I didn't know how to be a person around other people because of everything that I was like trying to keep hidden about my life. So, initially alcohol was that tool. I could socialize, I could laugh, I could be funny, I could relax, I could turn off all those million voices in my head and be a person. But I always over drank. I was always drinking way more than other people were. And then later in life, alcohol became a way that I could access my anger because that was something that I didn't have a lot of access to on my own. So, it really turned against me. It wasn't a pleasant experience. And I got married and I started having children. And of course, as soon as I started having children, the conflict became bigger. I didn't want to be a drinker and raise children. So I developed all these rules around drinking, like I could only drink when they were starting to go to bed, or, like all of these crazy things to try to control it and not have it impact them because they didn't want it to impact them. But inevitably it does. It seeps into every aspect of your life. So my oldest son was, I don't know, 7 or 8 when I started to recognize that there just wasn't, I mean, I saw it coming for a while, but around the age of 7 or 8, it was like undeniable that there was something going on with him. And so part of the healing process for him, or like figuring out how to help him, I knew I had to help myself. Like I knew I had to get out of the drinking. And so that's really what fueled my recovery, I guess, was really wanting to be that mother and to be able to provide for him what he desperately needed. So I went to treatment after what appears, my thoughts on addiction are very different than what they used to be, and probably don't fall so in line with the mainstream idea of addiction. But what people would call failed attempts, I had several failed attempts at trying to quit drinking. I could go stretches of time, 6 months, 9 months, 10 months, but then I'd go right back to it. And so the last time I decided I had to step away from my family, I went to rehab. I flew thousands of miles to be away from them so that I wouldn't be tempted to quit or anything. But so I did. I got sober, and we had decided right before I got sober that we were going to sell our house in Seattle and pull our kids out of school and really try to focus on being a family. And so this kind of played into my sobriety. I knew I couldn't live in an RV with 5 people and be a drinker and try to hide it. And, so when I got back from rehab, we weren't in our house anymore. We bought an RV and we traveled around the country. And initially it was just going to be a year. We ended up doing it for almost 4 years. So I kind of raised my kids in a lot of ways in an
That's
RV.
amazing.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. I mean, we had so many wonderful experiences, but as they were getting bigger, right? Like us all living in an RV didn't really kind of make sense anymore either. But so in the process of all this, we were living in the RV, we were in Arizona, and something about my son's health really kind of struck me as like urgent. And so I got online and I started looking for doctors. I found a local naturopath that I took him to. And when we got the blood work back, he had, said it was quite possible that my son would, this gets me every time, that he would develop bipolar or schizophrenia, and that his blood work reflected that of an adult who had already been diagnosed. This was the first time that anything even kind of resembled what I'd been experiencing with him. There were just, he had already been diagnosed with Tourette's, but that didn't explain everything. And the doctors didn't tell us that when you have one of these things, that there's likely to be many other issues stacked on top, right? So many other diagnoses that could go along with it. So that was just like, holy crap. So that weekend, I just prayed and prayed and prayed. And I found a doctor who was also in Arizona at the time. And she got us into her office and she told us about the sun, and she told us about the ketogenic diet, and she told us about all of these things. And we started it. I did it with him because most of the things that I asked him to do for health reasons, I would do it with him because I never wanted him to feel like he was alone. But also subconsciously, I think I was seeking some sort of resolution for the things that were going on inside of me. So I did the ketogenic diet with him. I did the sunshine, and my life began to drastically, drastically change. Like something woke up inside of me that at the time I didn't have the words for. Like I could not explain, how is eating the ketogenic diet and getting out in the sun, like, how is that shifting some sort of trauma responses inside of me? And
Ke-
so I got
Kelley,
to
can you
study.
tell people how many years you were in recovery from addiction at this point that you introduced yourself to the sun?
It was about, it would have been pushing close to 2 years.
Okay.
I think we found her in January and like fully implemented the protocol by, say, July. So it was pushing 2 years of sobriety. Not quite, but right at around that time. So I'd already been doing AA. I went to meetings all the time. I was following the steps, I was doing the work, all of that stuff. But something about the sun and the ketogenic diet combined, again, I had no knowledge of what was going on. I was just following what this doctor told us to do, and things shifted like massively. And so I started studying. I also decided to go back to school for nutrition because I thought that's what the answer was. I thought it was in the food. And so I went back to school for nutrition. I wasn't getting the kind of answers that I was hearing other people talk about. So, in this live arena where there were people talking about the sunshine, etc., I met some of the people who are now like the leaders in the quantum community, like Carrie Bennett. And so I was kind of getting drips of information from Carrie on words like redox or, so I would go and study these things. And it was like a foreign freaking language to me. I had no idea what any of this meant.
What is your background? Like, what was your career before this? What had you studied? Like, did
I
you
was a
any science?
manager. No, I mean, I had wanted to be a nurse. I had wanted to be like a holistic health practitioner, but because of my addiction and because of my trauma, I never got very far with studying anything. I would sign up for school and then I'd quit 3 months into it, or I'd, do this sort of thing and then I'd quit because I couldn't follow through with things. So I was just a manager. I worked at a FedEx Kinko's. I managed a furniture store. I was a project manager at a web development company. So I had some medical terminology in my background. Oh, I was a pharmacy technician for a while. So I had terminology. I had some base level, like real base level understanding, but not for the words and the concepts that I was hearing. Like in high school, I didn't take biology. I took the basic earth sciences. I didn't push myself in that arena at all. So while I was going to school, I was also studying on the side for this like quantum information, right? And I don't even know that it was being called quantum that I had heard yet at this point.
Circadian? Was it called circadian? Or-
There wasn't these groups of people yet that I had discovered, so I just wasn't hearing this. Of course, the doctor said, it's your circadian rhythms, etc. But, I was really taking these pieces and parts and putting them together. And of course, then, someone would recommend a book. And so I would go and read particular books about mitochondria. Well, then I came across the cell danger response in some of my research. I don't even remember how. And that was when everything made sense to me. I was like, okay, I got this. This is where the mitochondria are. This is the electron transport chain. This is the redox potential. This is deuterium. This is all of this stuff combined into one perspective that also covers PTSD, asthma, obesities, diabetes, Tourette's syndrome, bipolar disorder, Parkinson's disease. Because before the cell danger response, I was having to search these things out as individual pieces to try to connect them on my own. So, yeah, the cell danger response was just like, oh, duh, okay, now I have very directed research that I can do and go down a road and understand it as a whole concept. And then things just started to unfold. I went back to school for functional mental health because now I was so far down this rabbit hole. In the beginning, I didn't understand. I mean, I don't think I understood that PTSD is a mental health problem, right? Addiction is a mental health problem. CPTSD is a component of a mental health problem. Tourette's is a mental health problem. I was like, oh, okay. Because nothing can be separated from, you know what I mean? Like if you have diabetes, there's also a really good chance you're struggling with depression and anxiety and all of these things. You can't separate the systems apart like this. And so, my son having a movement disorder, well, where does movement start? It begins in the brain. So, of course, there's some level of dysfunction in the brain, which can manifest in different ways. And then, of course, the more I studied, and then I found things like melanin, of course. And I was like, oh my gosh, because melanin and movement, melanin and Parkinson's disease, Tourette's is very closely associated with Parkinson's. Then, just all the things begin to connect, and they're all really one entire system. And we've been trained to think of everything as separate, and they're just not. And that includes our emotional state. And so when, then back to the whole PTSD or CPTSD, our emotional state is very reflective of what's going on at the cellular level. And so then I discovered, well, this explains why when I started the ketogenic diet and the sunshine protocol, my moods, my ability to have some level of emotion regulation became much easier because I was doing things to support my mitochondria, right? Like, so again, it took me several years of doing the studying to be able to go back and make the pieces all fit together. But yeah, so that is a really long way of saying that's how I came to the quantum community. I met really cool people from the very beginning. I met Carrie. I came across Meredith as she was starting the Quantum Biology Collective. There were just lots of awesome people out there that had already had a set of knowledge that they were willing to share bits and pieces of. And, I was out there with my little chopsticks catching flies and building my own practice, so to speak.
Oh, that's so amazing. I want to point out because this is a topic I'm passionate about, but the first 2 years of recovery, we experience what's called post-acute withdrawal syndrome. And that's why I'd asked you about where were you in your recovery? Because
Yeah.
when I discovered sun and this quantum stuff, I was over a decade into my recovery. And
Oh,
you were one of the lucky ones to have that you were still in that first 2 years when you're feeling the post-acute withdrawal. And I didn't have treatment either, so I wouldn't have even known, like in my early recovery, what I was experiencing.
right.
But you had that knowledge, and then you got that sun, and you got some other pieces of your health puzzle, if you will, that you were probably really feeling like just more of a shift even than someone who, I don't know, maybe doesn't have addiction or major mental health problems or whatnot. So I'm pointing that out because it gives so many people listening to this who are in recovery from addiction hope, because I believe that the quantum biology piece can just have such huge impacts on people, especially when they're in that first 2 years of recovery. So thank you so much for
Yeah.
sharing
Yeah, and
that detail.
I'll add another piece. I mean, my practice of daily exposure and intentional exposure happened later on, but when I went to recovery or when I went to rehab, I had to be up that early in the morning, and I was up at 5 o'clock, and I would go out and swim laps in the pool as the sun was coming up. And then when I got back home, I chose, because they had told me in rehab that the early morning groups are the most kind of put together, so to speak. It's usually the business people that are going off to jobs. They're the most, there's a statistic associated with it, like they seem to have the most longevity in their sobriety when they go to early morning meetings. So when I got home, I did that. I found the Dawn Patrol group. That's
Yeah.
what they were called. And we met at sunrise. And so I continued that practice. It wasn't intentional, but I was exposed to that pretty early on. And I will have to say, and I don't want to give anybody any sense of false hope, but in all the times that I had tried to quit drinking versus this time that stuck, this time I didn't struggle with cravings. I wasn't in the store going, there was none of that this time around. Now, maybe you could associate that with I was completely tired of my own bullshit and I had had enough, and that's why it really stuck and I did the work. But I don't discount the fact that there are other things always kind of supporting us in the background.
Yeah.
Was the Dawn Patrol outside?
It
Like,
wasn't, but I am an early bird. I don't like to be late for anything, hence the podcast coming 30 minutes early. So I was always early sitting in the parking lot with my window down, waiting for the people to show up. And then I would help set up the coffee, help set up the tables, etc. So it wasn't set at sunrise and we didn't meet outside, but I was always there at the time when the sun seemed to be coming up.
I won't promise I won't make this a tangent, but I have to mention this thought that came up earlier. You just mentioned coffee, and obviously they're offering coffee. I just arrived, my Caffeine Blues book, Andeea. This was talked about in our last episode. She's read it, and she's on a no she's quit coffee, and
Day
I have
14.
day 14. Okay, and I haven't officially quit chocolate, but I have quit dark chocolate, and that's my aim, because that is my little drug of no choice. And what the thought, to tie it back to something you said when you were talking about the alcohol. Wow, I didn't know the journey went on, and that you had tried several times. But I had this thought, I think she needs to write the Alcohol Blues book.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because apparently this Caffeine Blues book, it's pretty tough not to quit it once you've read it. So yeah.
Yeah,
So
I might have to check that out too.
and there was a book I read called The Sugar Blues years ago, and that was actually started my journey really questioning sugar. So that anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, one question for you. You just mentioned it quickly, and I actually don't know the answer to this. You mentioned CPTSD. I know from obviously being in the Air Force 20 years and a whole family in the Army, and yeah, most of us know what post-traumatic stress disorder is. What is CPTSD? And you were diagnosed with that, you said. Is that right?
Well, so I was never diagnosed because of my age and when PTSD came into the arena, so to speak,
Mhm.
of, being in the DSM and kind of being thought of as something that people outside of war can develop as well. So I was never officially diagnosed until like right at the end of my treatment. One of my counselors said, "Have you ever considered that you might have PTSD?" I mean, again, timing, it just wasn't talked about in that regard. In even like the nervous system. I mean, this is all still relatively new speak for a lot of people.
Mm.
So CPTSD is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And that really refers to, like, PTSD is typically a one-time event that causes the traumatic response in the body. and it presents slightly different. And then CPTSD is complex, the meaning it goes on for long periods of time, and it's much more relational, so to speak. So having dysfunctional parents, growing up in an environment where your needs aren't met, your attachment needs aren't being met, can lead to what's considered complex PTSD. And so PTSD, I like to think of it as this is a lot of the physical manifestation of what we know to be PTSD. We have disruptions in circadian rhythms. That's like the top symptom of PTSD. And then, your stress response system is massively skewed. And so you have triggers, flashbacks, emotion regulation issues, and then the energy management system is also significantly impacted. So this means you are more likely to develop cardiometabolic disorders, obesity, heart disease, diabetes, etc. And then complex PTSD is more of like the psychological component. So the narratives that we develop in our head that kind of run in the background that drive all of our daily decisions and kind of foster being dysregulated on a regular basis, not the triggering moment, but the just kind of chronic level dysregulation.
That was really clear. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to try and connect one dot here with the quantum biology side.
Okay.
Is what would you say childhood trauma, and you mentioned ACEs, right?
Mhm.
And blue light toxicity have in common?
So it's uh, so I just mentioned the circadian timing system, the stress response system, and the energy management system. These are three of the primary like regulators of our physiology, and they all converge. So trauma, ACEs, having adverse childhood experiences, and artificial blue light, they all converge on this physiological response that our body has to kind of adapt and get us through. And so in this modern world, it's kind of tricky, and I don't want to minimize anyone's experience. That's not what I'm doing at all, but just to kind of highlight the overlap here. So we are all exposed to artificial blue light, like, and unless you live somewhere out in the jungle, somewhere away from this, you've got street lights, you walk into a grocery store, you're driving down the street at 8 o'clock at night, you've got all the, signs that you're passing by. And then what's in your house? Like, we all have lights in our house. So artificial blue light is extremely toxic to the body when we don't know how to manage it properly. So it can completely disrupt our circadian rhythms or our circadian timing system. It completely disrupts our stress response system, and then it disrupts our energy management system. All of this can make you dysregulated and feel very unsettled about life, not being able to respond to daily stressors within reason, right? Well, that's also what trauma or having adverse childhood experiences does to us.
And pause.
Yeah, well, yes, yeah. But so, do you really have childhood trauma or like unresolved childhood trauma? So I'm not trying to minimize anybody's experience. Or is this a byproduct of your modern living that you can't regulate yourself effectively? So I'd make a lot of posts on Instagram that could be considered a little bit controversial, but really it's to highlight that if we don't understand that the way that we're living in this world is disrupting the very things that we are labeling with diagnoses, PTSD, all of these mental health conditions, bipolar, etc. If we don't understand that, how can we say that we completely have PTSD if we haven't considered what the light or the non-native EMFs in our environment are doing to our body, right? So it just
Yes.
seems like a very easy, I don't want to say easy though either, because it's hard. It's changing things in life is hard. But if all you have to do is change a light bulb and, change the filter on your screen and manage what time you're picking up your phone and step outside a few times a day, if that can bring a profound shift in your ability to navigate the world and navigate your emotions and navigate stressors, why not do that? And then see what's left over for you to dig into, because you might be trying to dig into something that's just a byproduct of how you're living.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
I know that my Instagram posts can infuriate the nervous system people. Sometimes I press buttons and they're like, oh, that's not what it is. But it's really just to highlight that they're really interconnected and they can't be separated. And until you put the effort in and you separate them, and then you know what you're left with.
Yeah. No, that is wow.
Wow.
So
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 glad you
so
you
so true. We
explained
have
that.
to look at the light, and we just haven't been. The light story has been, it's not in the research, it's not in the professional. I don't even know what.
The DSM
Yeah,
or
yeah, yes, it's not in the repertoire that we do not ask questions about the environment, is my point.
Yeah. Yep.
And we need to be.
something that Andeea, you bring up always with pause, and I just love the connection that you made. But I've now seen it in your posts, Kelley, and I just love the two of you. You're connected as well, but is dopamine.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
Yeah, I
dopamine.
wanted to ask the dopamine question before we left this topic. So, do you want to
Yeah.
ask the dopamine and loneliness post PTSD?
Oh no, you do it. You do it.
All right. Well, okay. So, can you help us? You had a post about this. Can you help us understand how the blue light can play a role in this, and how might it be contributing to the epidemic of loneliness, addiction, and aggression?
Yeah. So blue light, like I said, is extremely toxic. We have dopamine receptors in our eyes, and this is primarily one of the ways that we take in artificial blue light is through the eyes. And it does a whole bunch of things, but it makes your eyes hypoxic essentially, so like lacking oxygen. It triggers a bunch of processes, and one of them that gets triggered is dopamine. And so when we are staring at a device or constantly swiping all the time, we are getting a dopamine hit, which makes it so when we put these devices down or we, try to turn them off, we're bored, we're understimulated, we're not getting that same kind of chronic, obsessive dopamine hit from these devices in real life. Like real life doesn't give you that kind of dopamine response. We would have gotten dopamine from hunting, connection, being outdoors, things like that in the past. And the kind of dopamine hits that we're getting from these devices is just like to an extreme, and then it desensitizes the dopamine receptors. So not only are we getting these massive amounts at one time, but then they become less sensitive to the dopamine responses. And dopamine is deeply involved in our connect, like our desire to connect with other people, and it fuels social interaction. And so when our dopamine is completely dysregulated, either being way overstimulated or can't be stimulated because it's been desensitized, it leads to these behaviors that are isolation. you don't want to go be around other people because you don't feel very good. And when you don't feel good, right, you don't want, you have little desire to connect with other people, but also you're seeking the dopamine hit, the kind of hit that you got from your device that you can't get from people now. Like your interactions with people feels very dull, like someone, you know, brushed over it with brown paint instead of this bright yellow, orange, you know, attractive, energetic color. Now the world is painted in this dull brown, and it just seems so boring, and you don't want to engage with other people. So it's leading to this generation of children, young adults who are struggling with things like depression and isolating behaviors, but they're also blaming it on, again, this might get me in a little bit of trouble. They're blaming it on diagnoses or disorders that they've been given. Like they might say, well, and I'm pretty sure this was on that Instagram post, someone piped in and said, well, I think she said autism. I've got autism. And so that explains why I prefer isolation. And I said, well, you should look into autism because autism is closely related to dopamine. There's a dopamine dysregulation within the autism spectrum disorder. So again, you know, remove the things from your life that can be contributing to the dysregulation, like the chronic scrolling, using things like TikTok or YouTube shorts, the ones that require you just to scroll. You're really dysregulating your brain, and you're challenging yourself in your real life by doing this. So again, if you can remove some of these sources from your life, then you know what's left over and what you have to dig into and what you have to put focus on to like heal or mend or try to adapt, you know, in your day-to-day life.
Yeah. You make a huge point too, just about the isolation piece. Like that does not serve us in addiction recovery. We need to seek connection. So it makes complete sense why some people are so averse to going to a meeting or going to talk to somebody. Yeah, this just nails down that we're fighting a brain disease with our brain. And
Yeah.
not just people with addiction. Everybody's fighting something, and it's attacking your brain, and you're literally trying to fight whatever that thing is coming in from the environment. And it's not easy. And yeah, I can see how people could take that and be like, oh, well, I'm not validated now, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you just unvalidated everything that I've been searching for. And you kind of shared this at the beginning too with your story. And yeah, but we really do have to pay we really do have to pay attention as us, whoever needs to start talking about this, because it is a big deal. A really big
I,
deal.
yeah, and I would just like to highlight, because anybody who's listening who may still be on that searching path looking for an answer or a diagnosis, there's nothing wrong with that, because I think it can be extremely helpful in getting us to understand what's happening physiologically
Mhm.
and help to lay out a path to wholeness. Where it becomes maladaptive is when we become married to that diagnosis and we make it our identity. And then we start to say, well, I have PTSD, so that's what you get. That's it. Or I have this. And so, you know, and people will take it even farther than that. And like it becomes a safety blanket for them. And it becomes really difficult to disentangle their identity with the identity of the diagnosis. And it can happen in addiction as well. You know, we can become very attached to our addict identity. And if you've ever gone
Yeah.
to an AA meeting, you might hear the beginning stages of that conflict with certain people saying, I don't identify as an addict, so I'm not saying, hi, my name is so and so, I'm an addict. You'll hear other people kind of switch the words that they use, because everybody's trying to find their place in the world. We don't live in community that the way that we used to. And this is part of what drives addiction, is that lack of connection. And so addiction comes in many forms, right? You had just mentioned, like, not all of us have addiction. I would say in this modern world, it's probably 90 to 95% of people that are struggling with some form of addiction. And that's food, porn, your cell phone, TV.
Netflix,
That was next on my list. Netflix, you know,
sports.
traveling, you get a dopamine hit from
Yeah.
being constantly on the move, not staying still. So there's all kinds of ways that we have made isolation part of the way that we live now, and
Yeah.
it drives addiction. So, you kind of can't separate the two.
Yeah, well, you know what? It's funny you mentioned this. So, when I was in my or not my undergrad, I was getting my master's degree in addiction counseling. The statistic at the time when I would give a lecture was a 2015 study where it said, I think the number was 23.6 or 23.2 million people had a diagnosed substance use disorder. Now, I remember asking my professors, like, oh, where are some other statistics like this? And how often do they come out? And they were like, oh, well, those studies they're really massive, and those numbers only come out like every 10 years. And so one would expect like 2025 to be kind of the next, like, where are we at, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, COVID happened. So they gathered some numbers in 2021, and it has over doubled, you guys. The number is like 42 point whatever people with diagnosed substance use disorder. Now, we're not talking even here about people who don't have like a diagnosed substance use disorder, because there are definitely people out there that have addiction that don't have the diagnosis for it, because only 11% of people even get treatment.
Right.
So I put this actually in my quantum biology slides when I graduated from the Institute of the Applied Quantum Biology, because how do you explain for this? What's another funny thing is the last 13 years, our lights have gotten bluer and bluer and bluer, brighter and brighter and brighter. So there has to be some kind, it might not be the entire explanation, because definitely COVID, we were isolating. There were a lot of factors here, lots of variables, but I do feel that light plays a huge role in people that might not have the gene, if you will, for addiction. In fact, I know someone who got their genes tested, and they don't have the gene of addiction, yet they had diagnosed alcoholism. So, we can get addiction from our environment and the things that we are participating in behavioral wise. And that's the reality that we're living in. So yes, 100% agree. It is in this modern world, many of us are, if we don't have a substance use disorder of some kind, or we're not abusing some kind of substance, there's some type of behavioral something going on. And it might not wreak havoc in your life where death is coming to knock on your door, and it hasn't ruined all the relationships in your life, but you may have underlying health issues that you don't know what the cause is and all that. So yeah, I'll get
Or
off my
just,
soapbox now, but
yeah, but even just minor things, like how many people, just scrolling through Instagram, for example, these beautiful influencers that are, they drink on the weekends, they're having a great time. And then in their stories during the week, they talk about how depressed they are and how they don't sleep very well and they can't put the sugar down. These are all mild forms of addiction. I mean,
yeah.
it's a spectrum, if this is causing you to be depressed during the week, yet you continue to do it all weekend long from Friday until Sunday afternoon after the football game, that's that's addiction. Doing something despite its negative behavior, or its negative outcomes, is addiction. And so we don't recognize the full spectrum of addiction. But I can say on my cell phone, when I stare at it for an hour and 25 minutes, and then I have an upset stomach and a mild headache and I feel a little bit anxious, that's an addiction. I still do it regardless of the fact that it makes me not feel well. So it really is a bigger problem. And I think just in general, with all of the talk around trauma and, people wanting to regulate their nervous system, I mean, some of the basic things you can do to try to regulate your nervous system is to cut out the artificial sources of light as much as you can, right? Open your window a little bit. I don't know if you can hear the birds chirping, right? Like, put filters on your screen. There are all kinds of little tweaks that you can do throughout your day that don't massively change how you're living your life. They just filter out some stuff that is really negative and has negative consequences on your health, you know?
Yeah.
Kelley, on the nervous system, got a couple of questions for you.
Yeah.
It's just perfect that you mentioned that. Do you think that you can have a regulated nervous system without implementing the quantum practices to kind of expand your window of tolerance?
There was a period of time where I would have said no. No, I don't think you can. And I'm not sure that I've completely swung the other end of the spectrum. I do believe that it is, but I do believe it's imperative to have a regulated nervous system. I do believe you have to be conscientious of what is in your current environment. That said, I have watched so many people, including myself, go to the extreme of like stressing chronically over, oh my gosh, that light isn't the right light bulb. And my husband has on a light in the other room and it's after sunset. Or I can't go over to my friend's house for dinner because they don't have the right kind of light, being equally as impactful as, you know? So
We need a new term like orthorexia for dietary. We need
yeah.
a new one for the quantum.
I mean, but I think that there is, when you embark on any healing journey, especially if you come from a really dark space like I did, I had to use a lot of force to get me out of where I was. I was, now with this understanding of the nervous system, I was in a state of collapse. Like, I was in freeze mode. I was super overweight. I was leptin resistant, all the things, right? I did not have the energy to move through the day, but the gas pedal was still being pushed. So I was a chronic overperformer from morning until night, and I had my lists and all my things, but I was just a mess. So where was I going with that?
I'd love to ask you about leptin.
Okay.
Okay, because
Yeah.
you mentioned it.
Yeah.
Our audience doesn't know a whole lot about leptin. It's a fat hormone that docks in the hypothalamus. I don't know if we've mentioned it, but it
Okay.
should dock there every night, and kind of it's like this energy accountant, to
Yes.
figure out,
Yes.
did we eat enough today? Did we exercise too much? All these things. But I was going to ask you, what role does leptin play in the nervous system?
It's
In particular?
actually, yeah, it's actually intimately tied to the nervous system.
Okay.
Leptin and the sympathetic nervous system have a very close relationship. So when leptin goes out of balance, you're activating the sympathetic nervous system. but also in reverse, when the sympathetic nervous system is activated, it will send leptin out of balance. So they can't be disentangled from each other. And leptin is the master accountant of body fat. Like you said, it's like an energy accountant, but it's one of our master circadian hormones. So it sits between the energy management system, the stress response system, and their circadian timing system. So again, another one of those things that just can't be separated from any of it.
Right.
So if you're living under artificial blue light all the time, you're staying up late, etc., you're bound to get circadian rhythm disruption. You're bound to have blood sugar dysregulation issues. You're probably going to struggle with your weight one way or the other. But it doesn't just work from the light down, it works from the emotional component down as well. So if you are under chronic stress, emotion issues, maybe you've got a poor relationship or unresolved childhood trauma, your leptin's going to be out of balance, your sympathetic nervous system's going to be activated. And so again, you can't separate any of this stuff. So why not tackle the easier stuff like managing your light environment so that you can see what's left over and you can again dig in from there.
Yeah, that's funny. That was the sympathetic nervous system was a piece of that answer, because I was going to ask you with the Laura's original question about having a regulated nervous system without implementing quantum practices. I was going to say, is your answer because basically blue light is keeping our sympathetic nervous system on, and we can't really activate healing unless we are in our parasympathetic. So
Right.
we do have to take a look at least that one non-native EMF being blue light.
Yeah.
At least we
There
have to look at
are,
the one.
but the reason why I hesitate to answer that completely is because there are people that I know that have health, full body health, that are into other ways of managing their health, and I'm not entirely sure that they are even aware of artificial blue light.
Mm,
And they're pretty regulated.
okay.
So it makes me wonder that if you're not stuck in what I call trauma consciousness, like if you have higher vibrational emotional states, if you can't become like your own personal Faraday cage, because right, emotions are a frequency, this light is a frequency, non-native EMFs that we get from these devices, those are a frequency. So I'm just curious if when you get to that kind of higher vibrational emotional states where you kind of embody love, not just that you love people, but you embody love, if that isn't kind of your own personal protection, so to speak. So that's why I kind of hesitated to answer that completely.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. And
That's
we never really
so
want to swing one way or the other, because there's always going to be nuance.
Yeah.
And yeah, we don't want to have black and white thinking around what we are trying to do to help people. Like we want, yeah, we want balance and everything.
that is so profound. The Faraday cage, personal Faraday cage. Oh my God. Okay. You're the subject that when we contacted you to have you on, you said you would love to speak to this. So I'm going to ask the question because I don't know the time right now, but we got to get this one out because we want to talk emotions.
Okay.
How are emotions a quantum phenomenon? May have already answered it, but
Yeah.
it's a question.
So I mean, it was kind of hidden in there. Emotions are a frequency. They emit a frequency within the body. And so we have these lower vibrational states of shame, fear, anger, resentment, and those emit their own low frequency. And then as we move up in the emotion range, we get to things like love, forgiveness, those sorts of things. And those emit a very high vibration. And so when it's not as easy as it sounds, but just for purposes of speaking on a podcast, if you can get yourself to vibrate in a state of love, you are emitting a frequency to your cells, to your heart, to your brain that speaks of coherence. And everything needs to be in coherence, which everything needs to operate at their own optimal frequency to speak a language that everything within the body understands. Well, these lower vibrational emotions, they are not coherent. They're very chaotic. They cause chaos. And so when we are sitting in this emotional state of fear or anger or resentment from leftover wounds, we're like perpetuating disease at the cellular level. We are like quite literally sending the frequency of disease to our cells, and they just can't overcome that constant negative input. And so that really does make emotions a quantum process. But also in reverse, when we have dysfunctional cells, when our mitochondria are already in a state of dysfunction, like in the cell danger response, they are emitting a frequency of danger. They are sending out these signals to the cells around them that say, hey, look out, we've got problems here. So protect yourself or come and help us protect ourselves. So again, frequency, you can't separate it. And so if your cells are sending danger signals, what do you think your mind is getting? Signals of danger. And right, when we talk about the nervous system, it's all about danger versus safety. So sending safety signals. So very early on, I adapted the language of safety signaling to your mitochondria, to your hypothalamus, and to your nervous system. And you're creating an environment of optimal healing. And we could take it farther than that, but like we are all energy. We all are emitting a frequency. Our cells emit frequencies, our heart emits a frequency, our whole body emits a frequency. And when we come into contact with other people, we come into contact with their frequency first. And so your aura or your energetic frequency is informing my aura about what state you're currently in. And so we are exchanging information with each other without ever having to speak words or touch, which is very interesting when you think about what happened a couple of years ago and how much distance we had to put between ourselves in order to stay safe. And so it's really important to have these connections with other human beings, and we can support their healing with our frequency. So we can emit our coherence into the environment, and we can help stabilize the people around us with our stability. And so, the job and the work that needs to be, it's so difficult in the world that we live in with all of the technology and the information we have at our hands to focus outwardly and look at the world and want to help everybody else. We want to help other people suffering because we're human and we care, right? Like it's a draw for us. But really, the best thing that you can do is turn inwards and do your own inner healing so that when you go out into the world, you don't have to buy someone something. You don't have to interact with each individual person. It's literally the energy you're bringing and feeding into the collective that gives back to them without having to try to, become the savior and try to save the whole world.
Wow, that puts a whole nother level on being of service.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding.
Yeah.
Andeea, do we have time for a question on shame and fear? That's fine.
Kelley, do you have time for
Yeah,
that?
go ahead. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Now, what I love about these questions, even though they're really low frequency stuff, is that we're going to quote you because your Instagram is so rich with gems. Yeah, just like this podcast interview. Oh my goodness. I don't know about the rest, well, Andeea right now, but I feel really coherent because I'm just excited and feeling joy for these things you're sharing because other people are going to hear this.
Yeah.
People are really going to learn from this. Thank you so much. Okay, so Shane, you wrote, we are entangled energetically on a quantum level to everything in the universe. And you kind of said this, your thoughts and the frequency they create impact your physical and mental health, but also determine how the world shows up for you. When we carry shame in our nervous system, this information informs our relationships both on the macro and micro scale. How can we get out of this cycle of shame? Because I know that you've looked at that from your own, your
Yeah.
own journey. How
Yeah.
can people get out of that cycle of shame?
Yeah. So I'm glad you asked this question because this really plays into the new work that I have put out in the last month because, well, so getting out of the cycle of shame requires three things. We need to cultivate, we need to curate, and then we need to connect. So the cultivation aspect is really bringing awareness through language. Shame is really insidious. It hides in the shadows, like it's in the background, quite literally. It sits in the subconscious mind and often requires being triggered for someone to recognize or even be able to recognize that shame is hidden in there. In really chronic cases, there's postural things that can present that you can see. But so we need to cultivate an awareness through language. And this is really what I've been trying to put a lot of attention towards, because when you grow up in an environment that is dominated by traumatic experiences, but also just having parents that aren't very emotionally aware, we don't develop the language around our emotional landscape. It's really, really lacking. Like, I thought I was a pretty emotionally aware parent, and I was still not providing the kind of language someone needs to develop awareness around their emotions. So, the first way out of shame is to work to cultivate the awareness. And then you want to curate. And this is a process that I find to be helpful when you work with someone else, but it can be done in isolation, I think, with the right tools. This is the stage where we are going to choose what we want to keep, what we want to discard, and what we want to prioritize. And this is a lot of the narrative, like delving into what are the storylines that are attached to this emotion, because it's not the emotion that's the problem, it's what we've internalized because of that emotion. And so we all do it, we all develop, and they're split second narratives. They pop up and they disappear, and they can be tricky. That's why I made the reference in the beginning, with the chopsticks and the flies, because it is quite literally that kind of game that you're playing with your own thoughts. And then from there, connect. And so when we are in the third and final stage of connect, it's not just connection with ourselves and other people, but it's connecting that cultivation and that curation. So we move from intellectualization to embodiment. We go from understanding the process to being able to live the process. And this is where I see a lot of people get hung up in when they're doing the journey on their own. So many brilliant, brilliant women come to me and they have all the knowledge, they have put together the pieces, they have done their research, but they're really struggling to embody the whole process. And so that's where we have to get the mind kind of out of the way, and we have to drop into ourselves in a different way. And working with a practitioner who can kind of facilitate this movement in you by kind of mirroring back to you what it feels like to be embodied, again, back to that resonant frequency. And then from there, rinse and repeat. We can just keep doing it over and over and over again, because there's a lot of stuff buried in there for many of us people. It's like a gold mine in there.
Yes, there it totally is.
Kelley, you had a post on that on shame called "Suicide Shame Loads the Gun,
Mm,
Non-EMFs Pull the Trigger,"
yeah.
which I found really powerful. And I actually commented on your Instagram because it
Yes.
brought me back to Dr. Jack Cruz's post that called "Suicide by Light," and I actually like took all the pictures of all the people that he listed, all these musicians and that had
Oh,
suicided, what he felt had suicided by artificial blue light, and this where they ended up on drugs and yeah, not outdoors, and then eventually all the circumstances. If you really look at it from that perspective, it's like, oh wow, could that really have been the factor, right? One of the biggest factors. But
yeah.
anyway, that's the aside. But that your post, how can those two, shame and non-native electromagnetic fields, how do you feel they combine to make the perfect storm, as you wrote in this really incredible post?
Yeah, I think shame makes the psyche, the ego, very, very vulnerable. The deeper we have it buried into the subconscious mind, the more fragile the mental state becomes. And when we are in such a delicate, fragile state, any kind of stressor can be a tipping point. But I think very specifically, non-native EMFs, and that includes blue light, right? Because it's a foreign frequency to our environment, that it can take this fragile state and really just kind of tip it over the edge. But I do, and I've seen Dr. Cruz. I don't know that post specifically that you're talking about, but he has said it before, maybe on a podcast, that he had thought that the state of the mental health, in this country was due to artificial light. And I agree that it absolutely plays a role, but I think that component is missing, because what's driving someone to be so disengaged with life and spending so much time in an artificially curated environment? And I do think that there has to be, I believe shame is the one that loads the gun, you know.
Yeah. Oh my
Yeah,
God. Wow.
I agree. And you mentioned embodying.
Yeah.
So I think that so many people, maybe they love the idea of recovery. Maybe they're in recovery, but they're just going through the motions. They're doing the things. Oh, I'm supposed to go to meetings. I'm going to go to the meeting. And they never really internalize this work and this healing. And I just want to make the point that I believe that this quantum biology, circadian health, whatever term people are using, really does allow for people to, see truth, see the light, if you will. And so they can embody their recovery,
Yeah.
because it gives your brain context of knowing what's going on. And you just do such a beautiful job of articulating that. So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, just you take the science out of it and think about it from this perspective. When we live in such an artificially curated world, what kind of result are you going to get? You're going to get an artificially curated result. You're going to feel like an imposter. You're not going to feel like you're connected to your authentic self. And
Yeah.
so, really, you could say return to nature, or just return to self, however, whatever that looks like for you. And I do think that all of it is part of the process. So if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, well, I've only been just doing it because that's what I was told and I don't feel authentic, that's okay. That's totally okay.
Yeah.
Because I think that there is an intuition or an internal nudge that is speaking to you that says, something's off here. You got to keep going, keep going. And when you listen to that, you're going to end up on the path that you're supposed to be, like that's the path you're supposed
Yeah.
to be on. And so you're going to struggle, and you're going to hit road bumps or roadblocks, and you're going to find information that doesn't work for you and all of that. But it's all part of the process. And when you can look back at it and go, I can see why that was helpful.
Oh yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
yeah, not to say I was definitely one of the people. Just go through the motion. Okay, I'm not supposed to use this drug. Okay, I won't use it. Not addressing anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all start our journey somewhere. All right. So, Laura, was there any other burning questions you had? Because I think we should.
I
I
do,
think
but
we're at our signature question pretty
yeah,
soon.
and I just think, Kelley, can you just give us a yes that you'll come back? Because we do have, there's just this, there's so much to learn from you. And I feel like my head, this whole podcast, I'm gonna have to watch it back on YouTube because I feel like it's been going, I feel like my head's been going, oh wow, oh wow. And then the aha moments were like, oh my God. And I think my head went back, you know,
You
but
guys are too nice. That is, I mean, it has just all been part of my own journey. And that's all I can say is that I am incredibly grateful to be able to even like have a space where I can share it and that someone else finds it valuable because from this end, I don't know about you guys, but when you post on Instagram or you do these kinds of things, sometimes it feels like you're speaking to the void, like,
it's true.
hello, anybody out there? And so you just hope that on the other end, it is helping someone somewhere connect a dot and
Yeah.
maybe inspire and whatever. So, it makes me feel beyond blessed to be able to do this.
Awesome. Well, we're so happy that you came and that you're shared your heart with us today and your wonderful insights and knowledge. We cannot thank you enough.
Yeah, thank
So, our signature question is, what does quantum healthy mean to you?
Oh my goodness. It means incorporating it all, like the full range of emotions, the full range of thoughts, the full range of health, the full, like, just to allow yourself every one of the experiences. I read a book early in recovery called When Things Fall Apart by Pema Chodron. And she talks about being thrown out of the nest, like perpetually just being thrown out of the nest, learning to die a million deaths. And so that really is what quantum healthy to me is because your cells have a turnover rate, right? They die and do all of this stuff. And so just allowing yourself to flow with the rhythms of life through the seasons, and with each season comes a set of emotions and introspections and breakdown and rebuild and all of that. So really, yeah, just like living life to the fullest, whatever that means for you.
Oh, that's beautiful.
I have to just comment on that because my head went back again because it was I had another aha is that my word of the year of 2024, after a lot of thought actually was flow.
Mhm.
And then I, had this traumatic injury to my leg and I never thought I'd be going to these places with the word flow. But the way you explained that with the journey and just to, like you say, embrace it and learn to die, 1,000 deaths or however many. And anyway, I just had that was beautifully explained.
Oh, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Yeah.
That was a gift. My goodness. Well,
Thank you, ladies, for having me. What a blessing to be able to spend some time with you. You both are very insightful and kind and generous humans. I've talked with Andeea on, outside, and Laura, you've been in some of my
I
courses and stuff that I've done with Heather, and
Mhm.
so come full circle and spend some time with you ladies is a blessing for me as well.
Well, I have to say thank
Awesome.
you for failing the ACE test way back when, and just your personal journey of, thank you for that sacrifice of what you went through because now it's, you chose sober a few times, but you really chose sober. And just the having now you have this dopamine, the persistence to examine emotions, and all these things like trauma consciousness, things you've taught us today, the cell danger response. These are things that are new to some of us, and the nervous system, and just that introspection that you have done. Wow. And now, of course, you're offering courses and coaching people. And so we should ask you really, what are you offering? What do you have courses or do you coach?
Yep. So I just launched a new mentorship. It's called Roots and Rhythms. It's a series of 12 workshops, pre-recorded videos where I walk you through the steps of kind of what we just talked about, the curate, cultivate, and connect process, learning the language of your own nervous system, navigating the emotional landscape, how that presents as energy within the body, and then going on to fortify boundaries and learning to navigate love versus fear. So there are 3 options of engagement for the mentorship. I have just a video series. I have a video series with 4 one-on-one coaching sessions, and then I have the video series with 12 one-on-one coaching sessions. And then I just started offering my Reiki, distance Reiki healing. I've been a level 2 practitioner for several years, but there was always something in me that was kind of hesitant to do it in a public forum. And I think I wasn't energetically ready to share myself with the world in that very vulnerable way. But I also didn't want to pass on anything of mine that I might have still been carrying that could hurt someone else energetically. And I decided that the time, I'm comfortable now. I feel pretty solid in who I am. So I
Yay.
started offering that. And then in November, I'll have a couple of more options. I think one might be called the Trauma Consciousness Toolkit, kind of navigate these lower vibrational emotions just as a separate option.
Cool. That's not an ebook. That's just, it's something people.
I haven't decided yet, so we'll see.
Okay.
I've got it typed up most so far, so it could just turn out to be, a low engagement or a low price point option for people who, just want to dip their toes in. But I haven't decided because I really have enjoyed talking about this stuff. So I might make it a live class and then turn it into, just a video that you can download. So we'll see.
And then what your website, your Instagram, can you tell us like how people can reach you?
Yep. So right now it's just through Instagram, and my Instagram handle is Kelley Croff. It's KELLEY CROFF as in Frank. I don't have a website, but I do have a podcast, and that is called the Quantum Connection Roundtable, which I host with Lauren Bradley. And that's pretty fun too. So yeah, that's the way you can reach me right now.
Super.
Awesome.
I think that's a wrap.
All right.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you,
you
ladies.
everyone for tuning in, and thank you, Kelley, for being our guest today. We will see you next time.
Thank you so much for listening to the Quantum Healthy Podcast. We hope you found some value in this information, and if you feel inspired, please share it and leave us a 5-star review. This will help us reach so many more people. If you want to connect with Laura, you can find her at laurakistmanwellness.com and Andeea at andeearay.com. Links are below in the show notes. Now, go find some sunlight and embrace your own quantum healthy.